everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. I've had multiple requests for a video on yardage requirements for different historical eras, so this is that video. Before we dive into today's topic though, I do have a little news update. I have decided to add channel memberships. My channel memberships will have the same benefits as my $5 a month Patreon tier, which is that you get access to all of my videos one day early. And then YouTube actually also gives you a little icon next to your name when you leave comments, which is really great, honestly, because although I do read and little heart every comment left on my channel, I do always try to respond to all of the comments that my Patreon members leave. So in case you've been interested in helping to support my channel, but you haven't felt like signing up for a whole different platform like Patreon, becoming a channel member is super easy because all you have to do is click join just right below the video, even if you're on the app, and it's only $5 a month. Now, on to our fabric yardage topic. I do want to preface all of these recommendations with the fact that there is no way to know with 100% accuracy exactly how much fabric you will need unless you're making the exact same garment for the exact same person multiple times with the exact same width of fabric. But this video will walk you through the approximate amounts that you'll need for the eras from the 1770s all the way through the 19-teens. And I'm going to be showing you examples of extant dresses, fashion plates, etc. from the various eras and how much yardage those actual garments will require. All of these yardage amounts are what I would personally require being a 5'10" plus size woman, so do keep in mind that if you are shorter or smaller, you'll require less, and if you're larger or taller, you will require more. So let's start with the 1770s and 80s, and this robe à la Anglaise from the Met Museum. This gown has a bodice that is cut separately from the skirts, and it has a matching petticoat with no ruffle. There's also no self-trimming on this dress. Since this gown is made of cotton and the standard modern width for cotton fabrics is only about 45 inches, that is the math that we're going to be working with for this particular outfit. So first, the petticoat. I typically make my 18th century petticoats out of like 3 widths of 60-inch wide silk fabrics, meaning that I would probably use 4 widths for cotton. My 18th century skirts are about 44 inches long unhemmed. So for the petticoat, we are looking at 4 times 44 inches, which equals 4.88 yards. For the skirts of the gown, you will probably want 3 panels of the 45-inch wide fabric or 2 panels of 60-inch wide silk if you were going that route. So then it would be 3 times 44 inches long, which equals 3.66 yards. So right now we're already at 8.55 yards. Now, generally speaking, I look at a bodice as requiring 1 yard and fitted sleeves as requiring 1 yard. So that means 10.55 yards of cotton. And to allow for some shrinkage in the pre-washing, I would get at least 10.75 yards, if not 11, just to be on the safe side. Now, if you were to do all of this with the 60-inch wide silk, you could probably get away with only needing about 8 yards or maybe 8.5 just to be safe. Remember though, that if you were to add a petticoat ruffle or any other form of self-trim, that number can go up quite quickly as ruffles really eat up yardage. Also, if you were to cut the back of the gown in one with the skirts, such as like en-furrow pleats or a sack back, that's going to require a lot more yards as well. And if your fabric has a directional pattern, for the 18th century, you'd probably only need about like an extra half yard or so because things are cut so straightly. Moving on to the Regency period, we have the lowest amount of fabric required for any era. Here, you're most likely working with a lightweight cotton fabric that modern speaking wise comes in 60 inches wide, so that's what I'm basing the Regency math on. This dress, which is also from the Met, is a great example of a basic Regency day dress. The long sleeves and bodice can both fit on only 1 yard of fabric, and I would make the skirts out of 2 widths of fabric. A Regency skirt for me would be about 50 inches long, though since this one also has tucks and a deep hem, we should probably add about 8 inches to that length. So in total, we'd be looking at 4.25 yards. Maybe go up to like 4.5 yards just to allow for shrinkage or just in case. One element that this dress does not have, which you do start to see in Regency dresses, is piping. Now, if you are going to make piping out of the main dress fabric, you are going to need to allow for strips that are cut on the bias, as in diagonally across the fabric. I generally recommend getting at least 3/4 of a yard, if not a full yard extra, if you are going to be making self-piping for your project. Next up is the 1830s. We are going to again call on the Met Museum for one of my favorite extant 1830s dresses, this amazing plaid silk number. Now, since we're working with silk, we're again looking at math for 60-inch wide fabric. This skirt is made of 3 panels and it has a deep hem, so we're going to say that the panels are 48 inches long. Our upper puffed sleeves are cut on the straight grain, while the lower fitted sleeves are on the bias. Generally speaking, I budget 1 full yard per sleeve for the 1830s. Allow another yard for the bodice itself. So that means so far that we're up to 7 yards, but this bodice also has multiple types of embellishment. I believe that the Bertha here is actually made out of bias cut strips of fabric, and then instead of the typical piping in the back of the bodice that you usually see in the 1830s, we have additional flat bias strips. We do have piping on the belt though, and around the sleeve cuffs, so that's a lot of bias pieces. Most likely we can get all of this additional trimming out of only 1 yard of fabric, so 8 yards will probably suffice, though 8.5 might be more comfortable. The 1840s is honestly very similar yardage-wise to the 1830s, except that the sleeves are not as large. So for the 1840s, you should be fine with about like 7 to 7.5 yards, as long as you're not needing any additional ruffles or any additional trim other than piping. However, for the 1850s and 60s, we are going to need even more yardage. For the 1850s through the early to mid 1860s, you're still going to be cutting your skirt panels just straight on the grain, like straight up and down panels. But now, even with 60-inch wide fabric, you might want as many as 4 panels for your skirt, especially if you're plus size. If you're going for working class or you are a significantly smaller size, your yardage here will probably be pretty similar to the 1830s or 40s, as the pagoda sleeves of the 1850s can require close to as much fabric as the 1830s leg of mutton sleeves, while the 1860s fitted sleeves will probably be more along the lines of 1840s yardage. However, if you're plus size, or if you just really want that volume in your skirt, because who doesn't, adding an extra panel will require about an additional like 1 1/3 yards. And also this era really likes ruffles. So frankly, depending on like how many tiers of ruffles you decide to add to your dress, you might need tons of yards more. Just for example, this blue dress from 1857 could easily require upwards of 15 or so yards of fabric because of the 5 tiers of ruffles on the skirt. Starting in the later 1860s, we have the additional complication that skirts are no longer made of those straight panels. Instead, we see skirts with gored panels, meaning that they're wider at the bottom than they are at the top. Now, if your fabric is not directional and it has like no right or wrong side, then this shouldn't really affect how many yards you'll need, as you can kind of just puzzle all of your pattern pieces together so that you don't really wind up with much wasted fabric when you're cutting. But if your fabric does have a right and a wrong side, or worse, if it's a directional pattern, or even worse, if you're trying to match plaids, you are going to wind up needing significantly more yardage. Just as an example, I made this dress several years ago copying this portrait of Isabelle de Bourbon, and I used 15 yards of tie silk, which is like a lighter version of taffeta. Now, I do believe that my fabric was about 50 inches wide, and I did also have a hugely long detachable court train, but I also did not have any self-fabric trim. So keep in mind that if you are doing self-trim, such as pleats or ruffles, you will need to add a ton more yardage to that. Likewise, when we look at bustle era dresses, it can start to be really, really hard to estimate yardage if you're doing a lot of self-fabric trimming and ruffling. For a completely plain working class bustle dress, you can get away with as little as about 7 yards of fabric. But most bustle dresses aren't plain. And bustle dresses are also, more often than not, made of multiple types of fabric. You might use like a stripe fabric here with a solid, or you might do a darker color with a lighter one, or maybe a texture difference such as like velvet and silk taffeta together. If you are going for a bustle dress made out of just one type of fabric and you're going to do at least a little pleated trim, I would say get at minimum 10 yards. But honestly, you're probably more likely to use like 5 yards of one of your fabrics and like 7 to 8 yards of another fabric, kind of like for this pink and blue confection. Her companion in this plate, who's all in black, she would honestly take probably even more yardage because she has tiers of pleats up the front and tiers of ruffles in the back. So that black dress could easily be 15 plus yards. For the 1890s and early Edwardian era, we see a lot less ruffles and trim, so the fabric requirements decrease greatly. The skirts, particularly the wide fantail skirt of the 1890s, can take up a lot of fabric though, since the circular shape of the pattern pieces creates really a fair amount of fabric waste. But even for a trained skirt, you'd be looking at probably about 5 yards of 60-inch wide fabric. Those huge puff sleeves of the mid-90s are back to needing a yard each. So if your outfit is made out of all one fabric, like this lovely blue number, 8 yards or so should be fine. And then with smaller sleeved outfits, you can probably even get away with only 7 yards. Dresses of the 19 teens though can vary greatly. For day wear, like this one here, the teens often flavored simplicity, and with narrower skirts and shorter hems, many day wear dresses can be made out of only about 6 yards. But evening wear tended to be made out of multiple layers of very fine fabrics, mixing textures, weights, colors, etc., and could therefore require just a deceptive quantity of yards that's pretty impossible to estimate other than on a case-by-case basis. Just as an example, I'm going to be making Rose's swim dress from Titanic soon, and I am ordering 12 yards of about 60-inch wide Georgette because her dress is made of so many layers, and that doesn't even include the base layer that the dress is mounted on. Speaking of base layers, please do keep in mind that when I've been talking about all of these fabric requirements here, I'm actually only talking about like the exterior fabrics that show, not the additional fabric required for linings and interlinings, nor anything required for trim or finishing other than that self-trim such as piping or ruffles. The one exception to that would be like the 1850s where I was talking about the ruffled tiered skirts or really anything with ruffles. I am including the base layer that the ruffles are mounted onto because you do tend to see that if the ruffles flip up. So I included that in my yardage requirements, but not like the interlining or lining of skirts that you would want for the 1890s or for the 1830s. I know that this all sounds like it requires so many yards. Even like 6 yards for a simple 19 teens day dress sounds like a lot, but it's honestly not. When I'm making my daily wear dresses with like full calf length skirts and just the simple bodices, sometimes even jumper dresses, I typically need about 6.5 yards of fabric, if not more. Heck, right now I'm working on a midi length princess core dress, and I'm actually using about 25 yards of fabric because it's made out of 4 different layers. But anyway, that is going to be it for this video. So hopefully it has helped to give you kind of a rough estimate of just how much fabric you're going to need for all of these different historical eras, or heck, even modern sundresses. In general, I do always recommend buying at least a little bit more than you think you'll need just to be on the safe side. I'm curious though, when you see a fabric that you love and you decide to add it to your stash for a future project, I want to know how many yards you tend to buy. So let me know down in the comments. If you liked this video though, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional costuming content like this out on Saturdays. But I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, you can, as I mentioned at the start of this video, join my channel memberships right here on YouTube. And I do also have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below. I'd also like to take this time to give a humongous thank you to all of my absolutely wonderful patrons who really make everything possible on this channel, particularly my patrons at the Romantic, Victorian, and Edwardian level tiers, who are Sharon, Mirage, Laura, Jean, Janelle, Audra, Emily, Kim, Maria, Sarah, Tiffany, Linda, Liz, Kimberly, Denise, Nurse Anita, and Chaos Chan. Again, thank you all so much, because I really could not make all of these videos without you. And thank you all for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!